Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Chat Like a Native. Today, we're going to be diving deep into something that I think is so important for English learners.
Okay.
And that is how to confidently start conversations.
Ooh.
And maybe even more importantly, how to deal with those sometimes awkward silences.
Yes.
You know, those moments when you're like,
Oh, gosh.
oh my gosh, what do I say next?
Right.
So if you are an intermediate English learner, and I know a lot of you guys are,
Mm-hmm.
this is going to be super valuable for you because imagine walking into any conversation, whether it's, at work or a party or just, with new people,
Mm-hmm.
and feeling like you can take control. You can start that conversation. You can keep it going.
Yeah.
And not just avoid those awkward silences, but turn them into opportunities to really connect with people. And, of course, to practice your English in the most natural way possible.
Absolutely.
So stick with us. We're going to unpack 5 simple but really powerful conversation starters
Mm-hmm.
that you can use in all kinds of situations.
I love it.
All right. So I guess let's just jump right in. Why are these initial conversation starters so crucial, especially when you're trying to, have conversations in English?
Well, I think, first of all, it just puts you in a different mindset, right? Like, instead of waiting for someone else to talk to you or to ask you a question,
Mm-hmm.
you're kind of taking charge.
Yeah.
You're the one who's being proactive, and I think that automatically gives you more confidence.
Yeah. It's like you're not just passively, standing there hoping that someone will talk to you.
Exactly.
You're actively engaging.
Yep. And you're opening up the door to connecting with somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be, another English learner, a native speaker.
Yeah.
Just somebody interesting that you've met.
Yeah. And just from like a practical point of view, you are actually using your English.
Right.
Right. So you're getting that real world practice. You're using your vocabulary.
Mm.
You're working on your pronunciation.
Yeah.
So it's really, really valuable.
It's huge.
Yeah. Yeah. So we talk about small talk a lot, right?
Mm.
What's the deal with small talk? Is it really that important? I think a lot of times.
Sure.
It can feel a little bit superficial, like why are we talking about the weather or
Sure.
something really basic.
Well, I think the way to think about small talk is it's kind of like a warm-up.
Okay.
Like before you do a workout, you kind of have to stretch a little bit, get your muscles ready.
Yeah.
It's kind of the same with conversations. You're not just going to jump right into, talking about super deep topics or personal things.
Right.
You kind of ease into it.
Mm-hmm.
And small talk is a great way to do that. It helps to kind of like break the ice a little bit
Right.
and just make everyone feel a little bit more comfortable.
Mm.
And the cool thing about small talk is that even though it starts with those kind of like, simple topics, it can actually lead to much deeper conversations later on.
Okay. Yeah.
You might start by talking about the weather, but then you find out that you both love hiking. And then you end up having this amazing conversation about, your favorite trails and all that stuff.
That's cool.
So it's really just about like opening that door.
Yeah. So it's less about, what are the right topics and more about just kind of creating that connection.
I think so.
That human connection.
Yeah.
So I think it'd be super helpful for our listeners if we get into some specific conversation sliders, some phrases that they can actually use.
Absolutely.
So what would be a good one that we can start with?
So one that I think works really well is, how did you get started with your work or your hobby?
Okay. I like that one. What makes that one so effective?
Well, I think it's effective because it's really inviting people to tell you a story.
Okay.
It's not just a yes or no question. It's like, tell me about yourself. Tell me about your journey. And people love to talk about themselves.
Right.
It's a chance for them to share their experiences, the things they're passionate about, maybe even some challenges they've overcome, or some achievements they're proud of.
Yeah, yeah. And how could our listeners use this in different situations? Like, how can they adapt it?
So let's say you're at work and you meet a new colleague.
Okay.
You could ask them, how did you get started in this field?
Mm-hmm.
Or what attracted you to this company?
Right.
Or even, how did you end up in this particular role?
Yeah, that's good.
And then maybe you're at a party or a social event.
Okay.
And somebody mentions that they love to paint. Or they play a musical instrument.
Okay.
You could say something like, oh, wow, that's so cool. How did you get into painting? Or what got you started with playing the guitar?
Yeah.
So it shows that you're interested.
Right.
You're curious about their story.
And you're not just asking like a really generic question. You're actually listening to what they're saying.
Exactly.
So what are some follow-up questions, once they've answered that initial question?
Yeah, I think the key here is to be an active listener.
Okay.
Like, really pay attention to what they're saying and then ask follow-up questions based on that. So if they mention that they chose their career path because of a mentor they had, you could ask, oh, that's interesting. Who was your mentor? What was that relationship like?
Mhm.
Or if they talk about learning a new hobby, you could say something like, were there any challenges that you faced in the beginning?
Yeah, that's
Or
cool.
what were some of the most rewarding things about starting that hobby? So just showing that you're genuinely curious and you're really engaged in what they're saying.
I love that. Okay, so that's a great one. How did you get started with your work or your hobby?
Mm-hmm.
Um, what would be another good one?
Okay, so this one I think is really versatile.
Okay.
What's the most interesting thing you've read or watched recently?
Ooh, I like that one.
Mm,
Because it could be anything, right?
exactly. And almost everybody reads or watches something these days.
Yeah.
It could be a book, a movie, a TV show,
Right.
even just like an interesting article online.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a really broad topic and it can lead to some really interesting conversations.
Yeah, because you might find out that you have something in common with them.
Right.
You both read the same book or you both watch the same show.
Exactly.
Then you can talk about that. So where would this one be especially useful?
I think it's great for networking events.
Okay.
When you're meeting new people, you're trying to find some common ground.
Right.
It's also really good for just like casual conversations. If you're waiting in line for something
Yeah.
or you're sitting next to someone at a cafe, it's just an easy way to start chatting.
And what about follow-up questions for this one?
So after they tell you what they've been reading or watching,
Mm-hmm.
ask them what they liked about it.
Okay.
What they found interesting or what they learned from it.
Yeah.
And then you can also share something that you've been enjoying. So maybe say something like, oh, that sounds really interesting. I've been reading this book lately. And
Yeah, that's great.
so again, it's about that back and forth,
Right.
that sharing of ideas.
Cool. Okay, what's our third starter?
Okay, number 3, what do you enjoy doing when you're not working?
Oh, I like that one too, because it's getting a little bit more personal, right?
Yeah, it's kind of like taking a peek into their life outside of work.
Mm-hmm.
What are their passions? What do they do for fun?
Right.
What are they really interested in?
Yeah.
And it gives you a chance to connect with them on a different level.
So where would this one work well?
This one is great for professional settings.
Okay.
Maybe you've had a meeting with someone and you're just chatting afterwards.
Yeah.
It's a nice way to kind of like break down those professional barriers
Yeah.
and get to know them as a person.
Yeah.
It's also great for social situations. If you're just meeting someone new,
Mm-hmm.
it's a really approachable question.
And what about those follow-ups?
So let's say they mention that they love to garden.
Okay.
You could ask them, oh, wow, that's amazing. Do you have a big garden?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of things do you grow?
Yeah.
Or if you also enjoy gardening, you could share some of your own experiences and, maybe swap some tips. So again, it's about finding that common ground.
And building that connection.
Exactly.
All right, we're halfway there. What's number 4?
Okay, this one is a classic,
Okay.
but it always works. Have you tried any new restaurants or cafes lately?
Ah, yes. Food. The universal language.
It's true, everybody loves to eat.
Right.
And it's a really fun and easy way to start a conversation,
Mm-hmm.
especially if you're in a new city or you're traveling.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great way to get recommendations from locals.
Right.
They can tell you about their favorite places.
And so how can you keep this conversation going, after they tell you about a restaurant?
Well, if it's a place that you've already been to,
Mm-hmm.
you can share your own experience.
Right.
Maybe you can say something like, oh, yeah, I love that place. Their pasta is amazing. Or if it's a place you haven't been to, you can ask them more about it.
Yeah.
Like, what kind of food do they serve? Is it expensive? What's the atmosphere like?
Yeah, and you could even suggest going together sometime.
That's a great idea.
Right.
Then you've got like a little plan.
Yeah, it's like a built-in next step.
Exactly.
All right, we're on to our 5th and final conversation starter.
Okay, this one is a little bit deeper,
Okay.
but I think it can be really powerful. What's one goal you're working towards right now?
Oh, I like that one. Because it's getting into what motivates people, what's important to them.
Exactly. And I think it shows that you're interested in them.
Right.
Not just on a superficial level, but like on a deeper level.
Mm-hmm.
What are their dreams? What are they striving for?
So where would this one be appropriate to use?
I think this one works well in more personal conversations.
Okay.
Maybe with someone you've already met a few times
Mm-hmm.
and you feel like you have a good connection with them. You could also use it in networking situations.
Okay.
If you want to learn more about someone's professional goals
Yeah, that's a good point.
and how they see themselves growing in their career.
So follow-up questions for this one.
Yeah. So if someone shares a goal with you, be really supportive and encouraging. You could ask them, oh, wow, that's amazing. What inspired you to set that goal?
Right.
Or what are some of the steps you're taking to achieve it? And if it feels appropriate, you could even share a goal of your own.
Yeah, that's a great way to create that sense of reciprocity.
Exactly.
Okay, these are also fantastic conversation starters.
Thank you.
But, beyond just the phrases themselves, what are some general tips for having better conversations in English?
Okay, well, I think the most important thing is to be a good listener.
Right.
And I know you've heard this a million times, but it's really true.
Yeah.
And it goes beyond just, not interrupting people.
Right.
It's about really paying attention to what they're saying.
Yeah.
Both the words they're using and their body language.
Mm-hmm.
And for English learners, sometimes it can be helpful to actually summarize what you've heard,
Right.
just to make sure that you understand it correctly.
Exactly.
So you could say something like, so if I understand you correctly, you're saying,
Yep.
and then repeat back what you think they said. And then they can clarify if you misunderstood something.
Yeah.
So it just helps to avoid any confusion.
Right. And what about body language? Because that's a big part of communication, too.
It is. Yeah, it's super important. So making eye contact is a big one.
Okay.
Shows that you're engaged and you're interested in what the other person is saying.
Mm-hmm.
Smiling is also really important.
Yeah.
It makes you seem friendly and approachable.
Right. And try to avoid closed body language.
Yes, exactly. Like crossing your arms or looking down at your phone. You want to appear open and receptive.
Right. And hand gestures, I think those can be tricky for some people.
Yeah, they can be.
Because, in some cultures, it's very common to use a lot of hand gestures.
Right.
And in other cultures, it's not.
Yeah.
So just try to be aware of that. And if you're not sure, just kind of observe how other people are using their hands.
Yeah, and just use them naturally.
Right.
Don't force it.
Another really important thing, I think, is cultural sensitivity. Because different cultures have different norms about conversations.
Right, like how much personal space is appropriate or how direct you should be when you're speaking.
Right.
Or what topics are considered taboo.
Yeah.
So it's really important to be mindful of that.
Right. And if you're not sure, it's always best to err on the side of caution.
Yes, and it's okay to ask questions too. If you're not sure about something, just say, hey, I'm not familiar with that custom. Could you tell me a little bit more about it?
Yeah.
People are usually happy to share their culture with you.
Right. And that shows that you're interested in learning.
Exactly.
What about those awkward silences?
Oh, yeah.
Because I think everybody experiences those.
For sure.
Even native speakers.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's just a pause in the conversation. And you're like, oh, what do I say?
Right. Well, first of all, don't panic. Silences are not always a bad thing. Sometimes they're just a natural part of the conversation.
Right.
Maybe people are just thinking about what they want to say next. Or maybe they're just enjoying a moment of quiet.
Yeah.
So don't feel like you have to fill every silence immediately.
Right.
Just relax and let the conversation flow naturally.
And if there is a longer silence, and you do feel like you need to say something, what are some things you could do?
Well, you could always refer back to something that was said earlier.
Okay.
So maybe say something like, oh, you mentioned that you were traveling to Italy soon. What part of Italy you're going to? Or you could introduce a new topic. Maybe say something like, hey, I just read this interesting article about, or have you seen that new movie that everyone's talking about?
So it's not really about avoiding silences. It's just about knowing how to handle them.
Exactly.
So for our English learners out there who are listening to this and trying to improve their conversation skills, what advice would you give them?
Well, I think the most important thing is to just be patient with yourself.
Okay.
Live a new language takes time.
Yeah. And it's okay to make mistakes.
Absolutely.
Okay, you're going to make a lot of mistakes.
Yeah.
But that's how you learn.
Right.
So don't be afraid to speak up, even if you're not sure if you're saying everything perfectly.
Yeah, just go for it.
Yeah, and try to find opportunities to practice. Talk to your friends, talk to your classmates, join a conversation group. The more you practice, the more confident you'll become.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to remember that people are generally very understanding.
They are.
Especially if they know that you're learning English. They're not going to judge you if you make a mistake.
No, they're usually just happy to help.
Right.
And they appreciate the effort that you're making.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we can get so caught up in our own heads, We're so worried about making mistakes that we forget that the other person is probably just as nervous as we are.
Right.
Or they're just trying to have a nice conversation.
Oh, exactly.
So just try to relax and enjoy it. So let's just imagine a real-world scenario.
Let's say you're at a networking event and you're surrounded by people that you don't know. What would be your advice for How to approach someone and start a conversation.
Okay, so first of all, remember what we talked about earlier about body language.
Right.
Stand up straight, make eye contact, smile. Project that confidence, even if you don't feel it.
Yeah, fake it till you make it.
Exactly. And then approach someone who looks friendly and approachable.
Okay.
Maybe they're standing by themselves or they're in a small group. And just start with a simple introduction. Hi, my name is. And then maybe add a little bit about yourself, like I'm new to this company or I'm really interested in this field. And then you can use one of our conversation starters. So maybe something like, what do you enjoy doing when you're not working? Right. Or what's the most interesting thing you've read or watched lately? And then just listen to their response and ask follow-up questions.
Right.
And just be yourself, be genuine, be curious.
Yeah.
And I think you'll be surprised at how easy it is to start a conversation.
And I think it's also important to remember that not every conversation is going to be a home run.
That's true.
Sometimes you're going to click with someone and you're going to have a great conversation. And sometimes it's just going to be a little bit more awkward.
Right.
Or you're not going to have that much in common.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
That's totally okay.
Just move on to the next person. And don't take it personally.
Exactly.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one key takeaway that you want our listeners to remember?
I think the main thing is that starting a conversation is not as scary as it seems.
Okay.
It's really just about being open and curious and willing to connect with other people.
Right.
And remember those 5 conversation starters?
Yeah.
How did you get started with your work or hobby?
What's the most interesting thing you've read or watched lately?
What do you enjoy doing when you're not working?
Have you tried any new restaurants or cafes lately?
And what's one goal you're working towards right now?
Keep those in your back pocket. And you'll be ready to start a conversation with anyone.
Absolutely.
So here's a thought for you.
Okay.
Think about those 5 conversation starters and which one resonates most with you. Maybe choose 1 or 2 and just try them out this week. The next time you're in a situation where you could start a conversation,
yeah,
just give it a try and see what happens.
I love it.
You might be surprised at the interesting conversations that you have and the new connections that you make.
Absolutely.
So embrace the art of conversation. Stay curious. And remember that every conversation is a chance to practice your English.
Yeah.
And to learn something new.
That's great advice.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive on Chat Like a Native. We'll see you next time.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.